Another day, another mystery. My life as a detective taught me one thing: trust the evidence, not your gut. The city showed me every trick. Nothing was truly supernatural. It was always a setup, a mistake, or a brutal reality disguised. Retired now. The really strange calls come in, tales of the unexplained, of things that go bump in the night and disappear in the day. People see hauntings. I see a challenge, and the human element, I promise you, is always the most chilling part. This next case took me to a place that should have been full of innocent joy and orphanage. But it was gripped by a creeping dread, and the source of the fear was something utterly unexpected: a dollhouse. They called it cursed. I called it a very twisted game. The plea came from a harried social worker, her voice thin with exhaustion and a palpable undercurrent of fear. "Detective," she explained, "it asked the children at the Jude S. orphanage. Something as affecting them. They having the same nightmares, acting out, and it all started when the dollhouse arrived." Jude S. was an old, respected orphanage, a place meant to offer solace and stability to children who had lost everything. It was located in a quiet, older neighborhood, far from the city center, a place of comforting routines and kind caregivers. But lately, the atmosphere there had turned sour, thick with an unsettling dread. The source of their terror was a recent donation, an old, intricately crafted dollhouse. It was a beautiful piece, a miniature replica of a Victorian mansion, complete with tiny furniture, tiny dolls, and even working miniature lamps. It was meant to be a gift, a source of joy, but shortly after its arrival, the children, particularly those who spent the most time playing with it, began experiencing terrifying, shared nightmares. They'd wake up screaming, describing identical visions of tiny, shadowy figures moving within the dollhouse, or of the dolls themselves coming to life, whispering sinister commands. Soon, the nightmares started manifesting in their waking lives. The children became withdrawn, paranoid, distrustful of each other. Then, the accidents began. Small mishaps at first, a child tripping, another inexplicably dropping a heavy toy. But then, they escalated to bizarre, violent outbursts among the children, seemingly unprovoked, mirroring twisted versions of the scenarios that had played out in their shared nightmares. A child would suddenly push another down the stairs, claiming a doll told them to. A quiet girl would inexplicably throw a heavy object, hurting a caregiver, then claim the tiny figures were fighting in the parlor. It was utterly horrifying. The caregivers, overwhelmed and desperate, were convinced the dollhouse was possessed or cursed by some malevolent entity. They spoke of the dollhouse as unsettlingly realistic details, its tiny dolls with eerily vacant stares, as if waiting to be brought to life by something sinister. They pointed to the rising tide of fear and inexplicable violence as proof of supernatural influence. The orphanage was in chaos, its once nurturing environment shattered by an unseen terror. The social worker, a woman who'd seen her share of tough cases, admitted she was seeing things herself, fleeting movements in her peripheral vision when near the dollhouse, faint whispers that seemed to come from its miniature windows. I walked into that orphanage, and the palpable fear was almost suffocating. The children huddled together, their eyes wide with a terror that went beyond childish fright. I listened to the social worker's frantic account, to the whispered tales of possessed toys and malevolent spirits. I looked at the dollhouse. It was indeed a masterwork of miniature craftsmanship, almost to perfect. But I wasn't looking for spirits. I was looking for the mechanism, for the source of the manipulation. My experience had taught me that when children are involved and supernatural claims are made, the truth is often far more tragic and human. My initial investigation focused on the dollhouse itself. I meticulously examined every room, every tiny piece of furniture, every doll. It was all impeccably made, almost too real. I noticed, however, that the working miniature lamps inside the dollhouse weren't just decorative. They seemed to have a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker, a slight variation in their light that was unusual for standard low-voltage bulbs. And the dolls themselves, while beautifully crafted, had an odd rigidity to them, their tiny hands and feet almost perfectly placed. I also noticed a faint, sweet, almost cloying smell emanating from the dollhouse, like old, decaying potpourri, but with an underlying chemical tang. I then turned my attention to the children themselves, not as victims of a curse, but as subjects of a strange phenomenon. I observed their play, their interactions. I noticed that the accidents and outbursts always seemed to occur after extended periods of playing with or being near the dollhouse, and often coincided with periods of increased fatigue or stress in the orphanage. And the shared nightmares, that was a powerful clue. Children don't usually have identical, vivid nightmares unless something is actively influencing them. I had a team of specialists brought in, not exorcists, but child psychologists, forensic audio engineers, and a materials science expert. While the psychologists began gentle interviews with the children, trying to understand their shared experiences, the engineers meticulously disassembled the dollhouse. The lab results were chilling, stripping away the veil of the supernatural piece by piece. The miniature lamps inside the dollhouse, they weren't just standard bulbs. They were custom-made LED lights, operating at specific, very low frequencies, calibrated to emit subliminal flickering patterns just below the threshold of conscious perception, but detectable by the subconscious mind, especially by young, developing brains. This type of flickering could induce visual hallucinations, heighten anxiety, and disrupt normal sleep patterns, making subjects more susceptible to suggestion. The dolls themselves, inside their meticulously crafted bodies, the materials science expert found microscopic, almost unnoticeable speakers, tiny but powerful, wirelessly connected to a hidden audio receiver within the dollhouse's base. These speakers were emitting low-frequency infrasound sound below the range of human hearing, which is known to cause feelings of dread, anxiety, and even perceived presences, along with very faint, whispered audio recordings, layered within the infrasound, barely audible but consciously perceived as whispers or voices. The sweet, cloying smell that was a slow-release, aerosolized psychoactive compound designed to induce mild disorientation and increase suggestibility, subtly mixed with an air freshener. Now, the whole sinister picture snapped into focus. This wasn't a possessed dollhouse. This was a brilliantly orchestrated, multi-layered campaign of psychological manipulation, specifically targeting vulnerable children. And the culprit was far more terrifying than any ghost. Here's how it went down, plain as day. The dollhouse was a custom-made instrument of psychological warfare, designed and built by a cunning individual who understood child psychology, subliminal messaging, and illicit technology. This individual, we later identified as a former orphanage employee with a background in experimental psychology and a severe gambling addiction, had planned to use the children as pawns in a horrific scheme. His goal: to orchestrate accidents and violent outbursts among the children, making them seem unstable and dangerous. This would cause the orphanage to be deemed unsafe, leading to its closure and the forced displacement of the children. Why? Because the orphanage sat on a highly valuable piece of land, an old property in a rapidly developing neighborhood. The former employee, deeply in debt, was in league with a ruthless land developer who wanted to acquire the orphanage property at a drastically reduced price, free of the legal and ethical complications of evicting children. The culprit had built the dollhouse, meticulously embedding the subliminal flickering lights and the hidden infrasound speakers within its structure. The lights were designed to disrupt the children's sleep cycles and increase their visual suggestibility, making them see things. The infrasound and faint whispered recordings were designed to induce feelings of dread and to plant specific commands or scenarios into their subconscious minds. The psychoactive compound released from the dollhouse further heightened their suggestibility and induced the shared nightmares. The accidents and violent outbursts weren't random. They were the children acting out the scenarios being subconsciously fed to them through the dollhouse scenarios of conflict, aggression, and danger. The culprit would subtly guide their play, perhaps by manipulating which dolls were placed where, or by activating specific whispered commands through the dollhouse when a particular child was nearby. He was turning innocent children into unwitting agents of his own destructive scheme, making them appear dangerous and the orphanage unsafe, thereby facilitating the cheap acquisition of the land. No curse, just a greedy, twisted individual who weaponized the innocence of children and the power of their developing minds for cold, hard cash. He used a dollhouse as his instrument of terror and fear as his accomplice. So, there you have it, the case of the Dollhouse of Nightmares and the terror it supposedly inflicted. No possessed toys, no malevolent spirits twisting innocent minds. Just another perfectly rational, albeit utterly deplorable, instance of human cruelty and chilling psychological manipulation. This one, it still leaves a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't about theft or property. It was about the systematic, insidious abuse of trust and innocence for profit. These were vulnerable children, looking for safety and stability, and someone decided to turn their fragile minds into a playground for terror. They weren't attacked by some phantom. They were subtly, cruelly conditioned to act out a destructive script, all for the sake of a real estate deal. Their belief in a cursed dollhouse was a desperate attempt to make sense of inexplicable torment, something utterly beyond their comprehension. It has a chilling thought, isn't it, that the most dangerous monsters aren't always the ones hiding in the shadows or under the bed. Sometimes they raid the ones who look perfectly normal, who exploit the very innocence they were meant to protect. They don't need supernatural powers. They just need an understanding of human psychology, especially a child's developing mind, and a willingness to use it for the darkest purposes. They want you to blame the supernatural, to fear the toy, so you don't look at the person pulling the strings. For me, this case was a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity. It cemented the idea that while ancient legends of curses and possessions are compelling, the reality of human malice can be far more complex, precise, and insidious. A truly skilled criminal doesn't just commit a crime, They orchestrate an entire psychological landscape to cover their tracks and achieve their objectives. So, the next time you hear a wild tale of a place seemingly cursed by unnatural events, or objects that defy simple logic, especially when it seems that someone, or some entity, stands to benefit from the resulting fear, stop. Don't jump to conclusions, no matter how thrilling or terrifying they might seem. Look for the small details, the subtle flicker, the faint, unusual smell. The one person whose background might give them the means and the motive for such an intricate deception. Because often, the true horror isn't some ancient spirit or a possessed toy. It has the cold, calculated intent of another human being. And that, in my book, is far more terrifying. Until next time, stay curious, but always stay vigilant, and maybe, just maybe, be wary of gifts that seem too perfect.